What is the true meaning of Christmas? Why do we really celebrate this holiday on the 25th of December? What does it really commemorate? Um, of course, lots of people will make videos like this is the real meaning of Christmas, or people will talk about what is the true meaning of Christmas in responding to kind of against the materialism that has arisen in American culture. And we think of Christmas a lot of times in our country as like this holiday, and a lot of ways a secular holiday in which we gather together to give gifts and to do all these things, have all this Christmas music and so on. And so a lot of you are probably used to seeing people talk about, what is the real meaning of Christmas, kind of in response to that. And there's good in that. However, tonight, what I would like to talk about is focus more on the Christian world, and focus more on the Christian perspective, and talk about what is the real meaning of Christmas. Why is it actually that God became man? Why did Christ come to us? What is the meaning? What is the significance of the birth of Christ? And in part, what I'm responding to is this idea that I've often heard. It's something I heard quite a number of times in my days before becoming an Orthodox Christian, was that it's all about the cross, and the Christmas points to the crucifixion of Jesus, and it's all about, again, like I said, it's all about the cross. And of course there's some truth to that. If you saw the video that I did, was it a week or two ago, about the symbolism of the nativity icon in Orthodox Christianity, of course there's a lot of symbolism in the nativity icon that's pointing to the crucifixion and to the death and burial of Christ. However, what I want to talk about this evening is that there's considerably more to the advent of Christ, to the coming of Christ to us in this world, the birth and the incarnation of God, than simply this being a means to an end, and that end being the cross. And we'll get into that as we go along this evening. So I'd like to welcome all of you once again to The Sacred Life. As always, I am your host, David Baylor. It's good to be here again. I hope that you all are preparing. If you are Orthodox Christians, that you all have had a blessed fast. We are in the Nativity fast, and that, of course, ends on the day of Christmas. And we're looking forward to celebrating the birth of our Lord. So I just wish everybody in the audience a very Merry Christmas, I guess, as it were. And just once again, remind everybody, please consider becoming a channel member, helping to support us at The Sacred Life. We really appreciate things like super chats, super thanks if you're watching this later, hypes, shout outs, however that all works. They're always changing the way things work here on YouTube. So I don't know not always on top of how that all works, but all those things are helpful to us. You can also check out the link in our description. We do have a Patreon, and that supports our Lives of the Saints project. So it's we're working on an animated project. It'll probably take some time to actually do that. It's pretty complicated to do animations and things like that. Thanks Dakota Wallace for your subscription. Appreciate that. So you can check out the Patreon for that. We're also going to be doing some of those stories as like radio dramas, radio plays here on YouTube as well. We'll probably be releasing those on our second channel, and you can find the link for that in the description as well. So those are some things to look forward to. Continuing to do also symbolic analyses of things like Orthodox icons. Eventually, I'm going to be doing that as well for some of the hymnody of the Orthodox liturgical cycle. So those are all some things that are coming up. We'll continue to also to do our our ongoing exploration of church history and of like the philosophical side of Christianity. Of course, once I like to periodically remind everybody, this is not a channel to be like, we're not teachers. We're not there's certain things we're going to avoid, such as dogmatic theology. That's not our place here. So we don't do that at The Sacred Life. Well, instead we like to have conversations about things especially if it's the three of us, myself, my brother John, and our friend Aaron Beachy together. We can do that. And if it's just me, I like to hear your comments in the live chat, and of course we'll be doing some responding to those comments and Q&As at the end of this episode tonight. So if you're watching, please stick around for that. And then, of course, also, I am the sponsor of the Sacred Life with my I Am an Orthodox Iconography by the blessing of my priest. You can check out the link of that in my description, the description to this video as well. You can please consider purchasing some custom hand painted icons, ordering some custom icons, also do custom commissions. I have prints available as well, so you can check all that out as well. Anyway, getting back into the topic of this video. So the question is, why did God become man? And we're looking at what the real meaning of Christmas is. And like I said, this isn't like the cliched Christmas time Christian video. It's like, oh, we have to explain the real meaning of Christmas, and it's not about all this materialistic stuff. And of course, that's all true. That it's not about like the secular holiday that a lot of people recognize as Christmas. It is about the birth of Christ. But we're going to be looking at what the real meaning of Christmas is, and especially what I want to, like, from a Christian perspective, and especially what I want to do, as I said, is contrast it with this idea that the birth of Christ is ultimately about the cross, about the crucifixion and the death of Christ. And a lot of this, like, it really arises out of like this penal substitutional model that a lot of Christians have, especially Reformed Protestants. And that's pretty much the default understanding of Christianity that exists in American Christianity and modern American Christianity. Of course, that's a generalization. Obviously, there are exceptions to that. Obviously, there are a lot of Roman Catholics, there are a lot of Lutherans, there are a lot of others in the United States that don't fit this definition of American Christianity. But that's like, I don't know, a generalization that I use here mostly to refer to like mainstream evangelical and Reformed Christianity that is, prominent in the, at least in like the mindset, what people think of when they think of Christianity in America. So, sorry if I'm generalizing in a way that excludes you if you're watching this as some other kind of Protestant. Obviously, that doesn't include myself when I was an Anabaptist. However, we were thoroughly influenced by these things. So, kind of responding to this idea that I've heard a lot of times throughout my life about, it's all about the cross. Christmas is ultimately about Easter. And, I'm not completely discounting that. Obviously, there's like a certain telos, there's a certain end goal in mind with the incarnation, and it is ultimately the redemption of man through the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, through his entering into death, his defeat of sin, and the redemption of man. Obviously that's an important thing, that the nativity of Christ that the Christmas holiday is pointing to, and that's kind of reflected in some of our hymnody, and especially with like the sort of parallels that are drawn. I wish I should have brought some examples up of this, but some of the parallels that are drawn between the like the nativity hymns in the Orthodox liturgical services and the Easter hymns. And of course, I mentioned as well, if you go back and look at the nativity icon, you'll see things like Christ being wrapped in clothes that represent burial clothes. We talk about things like the gifts being brought by the Magi, pointing to his burial. And there's another number of other things like that as well. So obviously, that is a part of that. I'm not completely throwing that out. But what I would like to point people to is just the understanding that this is not all that is going on in Christianity. That the incarnation of God as a man, that God taking on our flesh and dwelling among us and doing all of these things is in itself an extremely significant moment. It's like a total world-changing moment, and we see this. What I would really recommend to everybody, and I'm kind of summarizing from this book tonight, but is to go and read the 4th century writing from Saint Athanasius of Alexandria on the Incarnation. Really explains this really well. Just dealing with this question of why is it that God became man, and it is very, very significant that Christ, like I said, that God entered into human flesh, but like not just like fashioning a completely new human race, or making a man from nothing, but rather entering into our humanity, and by doing this redeems it. And so, like, what you'll find as kind of the ancient Christian perspective of like the arc of history, rather than being this idea that man broke God's rules and incurred God's wrath and punishment upon himself. It's rather that through our sinfulness and through our joining of ourselves to the serpent's rebellion against God, we have made ourselves subject to sin and death, and kind of have brought this disease of sin and mortality upon ourselves. And this is kind of like marred and obscured the image of Christ in which we were created. So one of the fundamental things that is going on in the incarnation of God, one of the fundamental things that is accomplished through the nativity of Christ, through the birth of Christ, and that we are commemorating, that we are celebrating and thanking God for with the Christmas holiday, is this restoration of our fallen humanity that begins when God enters into the world. And of course, there's also the overthrow of the dominion of the demons that occurs. And this is something I really, really loved reading, really loved encountering the first time I read through the book I mentioned, St. Athanasius of Alexandria on the Incarnation, is just this idea that when God came into the world, when God took on human flesh, things changed. Things like God has entered again into his dominion, into his kingdom, and this is overthrowing the power of the demons. And I really love that as well. So this is something, of course, that we are commemorating with the Christmas holiday. Is Christ is entering into the world, and this defeats the power of our enemies. Of course, our enemies being death and sin, and also the demonic powers, these fallen principalities and powers that we are, oftentimes dragged into bondage and slavery to. And so, I want to point to these things and say this is the real meaning of Christmas. And as we have the comment that just very timely showed up from Jeremiah Molodani. Why do, I assume you say, why do people celebrate Christmas? And this is originally why we celebrate Christmas. And of course, incarnational theology is central to authentic Christianity, central to apostolic and to ancient Christianity. Of course, it's central to Orthodox Christianity as well. And like I was saying last Friday, the last live stream I did, last video I did, when I was kind of presenting what really happens in the Reformation with the Anabaptist movement that distinguishes it kind of from the radical Reformation, is this recapitulation, this restoration of incarnational theology, putting it back at the center. And this is just this idea again that God himself has entered into his creation. God himself has entered into our humanity, has become incarnate. And this fundamentally changes the world. So I'll go ahead and address this another question from Jeremiah here. He says, but Jesus wasn't born on December 25th. That's a lie, and you don't believe that. That kind of doesn't matter. Like, we don't necessarily commemorate Christmas on December 25th because of because we say, oh, this is actually the day that Christ was born. The reason we celebrate it on December 25th is because of, I guess you could say, the cosmic symbolism of the date. And this is also, people who want to complain against celebrating Christmas on December 25th will point to the overlap of a lot of pagan celebrations on the same time, at roughly the same time of the year. But this is for the same symbolic reasons that we as Christians commemorate Christmas on December 25th. And so what that is that so now we're here on December 22nd. Yesterday was the winter solstice. So what that means, it is the darkest day of the year. This is when darkness is at its height. And there's this kind of interesting phenomenon in the way kind of you know, the orbit of the Earth and everything works. That there's about 3 days worth of time when from the solstice until the day really starts getting longer. Like it's not exactly true, but that's kind of a uh, it's basically true that there's about 3 days of darkness, and then it starts getting light again. So this is the reason why we celebrate Christmas on December 25th, is because it ultimately it points to the triumph of light over darkness. And so this is again one of the things that we are commemorating. Like I said, we are commemorating with the Christmas holiday is the triumph of light over darkness. And of course, the light is Christ himself. He is the light and the life and the salvation of man and of the world. And so this is, that's why we celebrate Christmas on December 25th. I mean, it's really that simple. It wasn't set that this is the date that we celebrate this, because this is, you know, forensically, historically, when Christ was born. If you understand anything about how ancient calendars work, you realize that's kind of a silly way of thinking anyway. We're kind of used to thinking in terms of our very clean, very well organized, very thoroughly developed modern calendars. But anyway, you asked me to give you a verse in the Bible that says that. I'm not a sola scriptura Protestant. That's not the way the real world works. The Bible was never intended to be like a scientific manual. The early church never used it that way. This is like a complete anachronism. It's a complete novelty of the Reformation. That just, yeah, that's not how Christianity works. Christianity isn't like Christianity is a relationship with the living God. It's not, that's not that. So anyway, moving back in with the topic of the video. Those were some useful questions. I hope you can understand, Jeremiah, even if I disagree with you. I mean, I can still respect you, and you are, deserving of dignity because you are created in the image of Christ himself. So please don't take this the wrong way if I disagree with you like that. But I welcome your disagreement as well. But your questions were useful in kind of what I was talking about, especially bringing out that point about the triumph of light over darkness. And again, if you go back to the ancient hymnody, the ancient hymns of the church, you'll see, of course, this is one of the centralmost themes that we are looking at with the Christmas holiday, is like the triumph of light over darkness. Because this really is what is happening, because when Christ enters into the world, he's entering into the world at a point in history where darkness really is, in a lot of ways, at its highest point. And then Christ, God himself, enters into his creation, and of course this begins the process of the overthrow of the demons, of the demonic powers. And so this is the Christian age we are in, is one in which the victorious church is marching forth, bringing forth that light, declaring the news of Christ's victory over his enemies into all the world. This is this is a major thing that we are celebrating with Christmas. This is a reason why why Christmas is such an important holiday historically. And perhaps also another reason why it's a holiday that that we could say that the enemies of God, that these demon-driven enemies attack Christmas so much, is because it is the moment that marks the beginning of the end for them. When God enters into creation, they're astonished at this, because like, we're done for. Because of course God's enemies have no power over him, and so when he shows up, obviously his victory is assured. Once again, just want to ask everybody, if you'd like to, if you have some questions, if you want to interact with us here on the stream. Of course, Jeremiah is dropping his comments in here, and I welcome the rest of you to do that as well. I'd like to have a little bit of a Q&A, a little bit of a back and forth. So of course Jeremiah says, okay, but Christmas isn't in the Bible. Yes, it is. It is in the Bible. Like, it's very clearly in the Bible. We have the description of this event all over the place, and commemorating the things that God has done in the history of His people and in the history of the world is, of course, something that happens throughout the Bible. Just because God, like, we don't have a writing down where God explicitly commands us, you have to observe this holiday and do it this way and that way. That doesn't mean it's not something that we should celebrate, because we should in fact celebrate the good things that God does. And you see this if you look at the history of the church. You see that we celebrate a lot of things that have happened in the history of the church, even since the days that the Bible was written down, because God continues to work in the world. He continues to work in the life of His church and of His people, and we celebrate that, we commemorate that, we honor that. And I would argue that not commemorating the good things that God has done, not commemorating uh, this miraculous wonder, not commemorating the triumph of light over darkness, like, this is dishonoring to God. Again, you ask, give a chapter and a page in the Bible that says that. Like, I don't have to. That's not the way this works. And I can also say to that, like, I can give you the chapter and verse in the Bible where Christ Himself gives the authority to His apostles to bind and to loose, and whatever they're binding is bound. And of course, this is a reference to the Mosaic authority that we see reflected in the Old Testament. If you understand anything about what that phrase means in the context of Jewish culture at the time, you understand what Jesus is telling His apostles there. He's saying, I give you the authority that I gave to Moses, which is that you are the holders of the law, and whatever you establish, whatever you bind people to, they are bound to. Whatever you loose people to, they are loosed from. And what this means is, it belongs to the church to make the judgment of how we interpret and apply these things. And of course, this authority comes from the Holy Spirit dwelling in His church and leading His people. And so you ask again, Jeremiah asks again, so do you mean that we just give Jesus the glory when we celebrate Christmas? If I understand you correctly, like, yes, that is what we're doing when we celebrate Christmas. It's like, this is to the glory of God. And of course, if you understand, like, if you look at, again, if you go back to the Torah, you understand a major way that God wants His people to be thankful and to glorify the wonders that He's done is to celebrate. So, for example, go back to the book of Deuteronomy, and you will see explained what Israel was supposed to do with the tithe that they had collected, and what they were supposed to do with this was to celebrate. There's a great big feast that they came together for, and brought together a bunch of food, a bunch of wine, a bunch of other things, and they it's to celebrate. Celebrating, being joyful. This is something that's important. God desires this for us, and this is, of course, Christmas is a joyous holiday. And I think this is especially true, like for myself as an Orthodox Christian, coming through a period of fasting for 40 days. It's not quite as intense as the fasting for Great Lent, but it is a period of fasting. And when you go through that time of fasting and prayer, and come to the celebration, like, it's a great thing. It's a wondrous thing. Um, so I understand where you're coming from, Jeremiah, because I would have been in a similar position once myself, had a similar way of thinking. So I'm not trying to be rude to you or anything, but I would just say, like, where I'm at today, I can understand what the way the church does things is definitely good, is definitely right. And I would just encourage you to kind of keep an open mind about those things. Of course, there are instances I think you and I would agree that the Roman Catholic Church oftentimes has made an abuse out of some of these things. Sorry to my Catholic viewers, but I'm going to be honest. Um, anyway, um, that's really most of what I had to say about this topic tonight. I thought it would be useful to just to kind of talk about that. Why it is that there's more going on to Christmas than it just being how would we say this? Just being God came into the world so that he could die on the cross. Of course that's true, but there's just quite a lot more to it than that. So, Christ entering into you know, there's quite a lot more I can say of the significance of incarnational theology, and maybe I'll follow that up tomorrow and talk about it some more. Um, but there's quite a lot. Uh, it's very significant. It's very significant that God enters into our humanity and that restores our humanity. And so now we, as Christians, are able to live this life of theosis, which is becoming like Christ. We're kind of restored to our original, again, telos, our original purpose, our original aim in life, which is to become the the Christ, like the God in whose image we were created. And so this once again becomes possible now that God has entered into, like, not just any humanity, but into our humanity. Um, so he enters into our humanity, and this restores our fallen humanity, and this makes salvation, this makes the way of theosis possible. And of course, we see through the life of Christ kind of this pattern repeated over and over again of Christ entering into things. This is what we as Orthodox Christians say happens, for example, in the baptism of Christ, which of course we'll be celebrating on January 6th. Theophany in the Orthodox Church commemorates the baptism of Christ, and of course, there we say Christ entering into the water, and this sanctifies the waters, and this is just kind of a recurring theme in Christian theology, is that God is entering into all of these things and sanctifying them, and that's making them fit and useful for our salvation. And of course, this all, um, like the centermost point of this is the incarnation itself. And so much of the life of Christ is just a how would we say this, a reverberation of this incarnational theology. Anyway, so getting back to the comments and the questions here. We have a request from Eastern Orthodox Christian to pray for me, and of course, brother, and you pray for me, pray for us as well. Um, and of course, John, this is my brother John, who is often with us on the Sacred Life. John, we'll have to have you come on, actually on the stream again sometime soon. I think people probably, I assume people miss you. Um, yeah, it'd be nice to have John and Aaron on again. John kind of reiterates what I was saying earlier, that it is, this is in response again to Jeremiah, um, that it is, of course, biblical to celebrate God's work in the world with annual and weekly holidays. And like, yes. And I was trying to tie that together by saying, like, look, Moses establishes a lot of celebrations. And of course, some of those are laid out specifically in the law. We of course we see as we continue to read the Old Testament that there are things that they did, celebrations that they did that weren't explicitly laid out in the law. I mean, I think Jeremiah, I feel like we've said enough about that. I know you want this, like this very direct sola scriptura way of doing things. And I guess, we have a few videos where we address that, and you can go check those out if you'd like, but I will just kind of recap and say, like, if you want to treat the Bible, and especially the New Testament, as if it is an exhaustive manual for the Christian religion, then it really does not do a particularly good job of it. And that's part of the reason why why the sola scriptura world is so much at war with itself. You know, to being an instruction manual, and you approach it in this extremely rationalistic and scientific way, and you've kind of reduced Christianity to a science, which is a modernist heresy, and this hasn't served you well, and oftentimes has got like detached you and separated you from the fullness of the faith, from the joy of Christ that you could know. And that's what I'll say with that. I guess, does anybody else have any other questions, any other comments, any other discussion that we'd like to have? Whether you agree, whether you disagree with what we've said here tonight, I hope I've presented something that's kind of helpful and useful to some of you, to get you thinking and be thankful for the work that God has done in His incarnation. To point to what we celebrate and what we don't celebrate. And I just especially wanted to leave you with this understanding that there's so much more to Christianity than just it being something that points towards Easter. This is an overly reductive way of thinking that people have. And just ponder and meditate the wonder of the incarnation, the wonder of this restoration of our fallen humanity. This opening of the doors of salvation to us through the incarnation of Christ, of God the Word. I'm not seeing a lot of other comments coming in. Just once again, remind everybody, if you have appreciated this comment, we do appreciate, of course, you're liking this video, subscribing to our channel, sharing this video, sharing our channel, sharing our content, helping us to grow. Of course, once again, we really appreciate all of you who have followed, all of the comments that you leave, whether it's, in support or criticism, whatever it might be. We love the conversation. And all of you that have subscribed and help us to grow. It's been a fun journey over the last year for us. A lot of twists and turns, maybe that we didn't always expect, but we love all of you, appreciate all of you. And again, please consider subscribing if you're not, becoming a channel member. So as we continue to put out more content, start doing some members only content, and of course you help support what we're doing here at the Sacred Life. And the other projects that I mentioned previously, our animated Lives of the Saints radio dramas based on that. Of course, I'm also doing some, working on some original poetry based on medieval hagiography, and we'll be doing some of that as well. And of course, once again, I am the sponsor of the Sacred Life with Gregorius Iconography. That's my iconography business. I am an Orthodox iconography with the Orthodox iconographer with the blessing of my priest. You can find the links to that in the description as well, and a few examples up on the screen. You can order icons off my website. These are all my own originals behind me here. I also do custom work. So that's a great way that you can support me, support what we're doing here at the Sacred Life, if you so choose. Obviously, no obligation. And check out our Patreon as well. That supports the projects that I mentioned earlier, and especially the animation project. And of course, super chats, super thanks. Those things are appreciated as well. But if that's it, I don't see a lot more comments coming in. I don't see a lot of questions coming in tonight. So I think we'll leave it with that. Thanks everybody for joining us. Jeremiah, appreciate your comments, even though we obviously don't agree. Appreciate the rest of you as well. Roach coming in here at the end and kind of adding to the conversation a little bit. Appreciate you as well. And just, thanks again, everybody. Until next time, wish you all once again peace in Christ.